The Lamb family once stood as one of the most prominent names in Christian television, projecting unity, faith, and moral clarity through Daystar TV. The network Marcus and Joni Lamb built into a global religious broadcasting empire. But behind the polished stage lights and perfectly scripted sermons, cracks began to show, and what has followed since then is a public implosion so staggering that it has left believers questioning not just the family, but the very integrity of the ministry itself. Before we dive deep into this story, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell, so you never miss first-hand updates on this unfolding saga and others just like it. The controversy that has rocked Daystar is not just another minor disagreement between ministry leaders. It is a story that involves allegations of sexual abuse, accusations of cover-ups, battles over truth and loyalty, financial ethics, and perhaps the deepest wound of all, an irreparable rift within the very family that once preached together about the love of God. To understand the magnitude of what is happening, we need to rewind and walk carefully through how these events began and why they have shaken so many. It all started in 2020 when Jonathan and Suzy Lamb, son and daughter-in-law of Joni Lamb, brought forth disturbing allegations that would forever change the family dynamic. According to them, their then 5-year-old daughter had been sexually assaulted by another family member. This was not a claim whispered in private, it was an accusation serious enough that it was reported both to the leadership of Daystar and to local police authorities. The decision to take it public within the family and law enforcement was already monumental. After all, Jonathan was part of Daystar himself, deeply tied to the family's ministry both personally and professionally. The courage to speak up was an acknowledgement that the stakes were too high to remain silent. But what happened next laid the foundation for years of conflict and mistrust. After the initial report in 2020, police investigated the claims but ultimately closed the case, citing insufficient evidence to move forward with prosecution. To some, this was the end of the matter. Yet for Jonathan and Suzy, the case being closed did not bring peace or closure. They believed there had been serious failures, that the truth had not been uncovered, and most importantly, that their daughter had not been properly protected or given justice. What's more, they began to feel that the very people closest to them, the leadership of Daystar, including Joni Lamb, were not standing with them in the way they should have. That sense of betrayal intensified when Jonathan was fired from Daystar in 2023, shortly before he and Suzy began to make their allegations public. To Jonathan, the timing was no coincidence. He has consistently argued that his termination was not about work performance or insubordination, as Joni Lamb publicly claimed, but about silencing him before he could speak openly about the abuse allegations and the way they were handled inside the ministry. To those who watched the drama unfold, the optics were damning: a son raising claims of abuse within the family, fired by his own mother's ministry, just before going public. The perception alone was enough to fuel talk of a cover-up. When news broke that the police had reopened the case in 2023 after receiving new information, it reignited the firestorm. For many who had followed the story since 2020, the reopening of the investigation validated Jonathan and Suzy's persistence. Even though no criminal charges have been filed to this day, the fact that law enforcement determined there was reason to look again made the questions louder. Was the initial investigation incomplete, or had there been pressure, subtle or otherwise, to close things quickly? The family fallout became painfully public. Jonathan and Suzy turned to social media, interviews, and public statements to share their side of the story, while Daystar and Joni Lamb pushed back with equal force, releasing carefully worded denials and statements portraying Jonathan's actions as divisive and harmful. For audiences who had tuned in for years to see the Lamb family smiling together on stage, worshipping in unity, and encouraging viewers with the message of hope, the reality was jarring. Behind the cameras, this was a family in total collapse. It wasn't only about personal pain, though. This scandal raised much bigger questions about what happens when ministries, especially family-run ministries, are left without the structures of accountability that are meant to protect both congregants and victims. Jonathan has publicly claimed that Daystar pressured him to remain silent, even asking him to sign a non-disclosure agreement, a move that he saw as an attempt to cover up rather than confront the allegations. If true, this would fit into a pattern critics often highlight in large ministries: the prioritization of reputation, influence, and money over truth, transparency, and justice. Daystar, of course, has denied these claims, framing Jonathan's firing as a matter of insubordination and poor performance rather than silencing. They also stood firm in stating that they do not support false allegations and expressed disappointment in Jonathan for refusing reconciliation. But in the court of public opinion, such words are no longer enough. Once a family ministry is accused of trying to bury abuse allegations, the stain is nearly impossible to remove, especially when the alleged victim is a child. And then came the financial controversies, adding yet another layer of mistrust to an already tangled web. Reports surfaced alleging that ministry funds, up to $100,000, had been used to cover Joni Lamb's honeymoon expenses after she remarried following Marcus Lamb's death. For critics who were already questioning the ministry's ethical backbone, this was a smoking gun. The idea that donations given in good faith for spreading the gospel could be redirected toward personal luxuries was, for many, the last straw. Compounding this was the revelation that Joni's salary had increased significantly after Marcus's passing, further fueling accusations that Daystar had strayed from its spiritual mission into the dangerous territory of empire building. As all of this spilled into public view, other Christian leaders and ministries began quietly but decisively distancing themselves from Daystar. Some pulled their programming, others declined partnerships, and whispers circulated within the evangelical community about whether Daystar could ever recover from this storm. For a network that once boasted a global reach and served as a cornerstone of charismatic Christian broadcasting, the hemorrhaging of trust was devastating. Underlying everything is a deeper and more troubling theme: the use of spiritual language to deflect accountability. Critics argue that Joni Lamb, and others within the ministry, consistently leaned on vague faith-based rhetoric, talking about forgiveness, reconciliation, or God's sovereignty, in ways that sidestepped direct answers to serious questions. To the hurting, this felt like gaslighting. To the skeptical, it looked like a deliberate strategy, using the language of faith to shut down dissent, silence victims, and keep the machinery of ministry moving without disruption. When you step back and see the story in full, it becomes clear why so many feel disillusioned. This isn't just about one accusation or one financial scandal. It's about patterns of silencing those who raise uncomfortable truths, patterns of using faith language as a shield against transparency, and patterns of prioritizing institutional reputation over individual pain. And while no criminal charges have yet been filed, and Joni Lamb and Daystar continue to deny all wrongdoing, the damage to public trust may already be beyond repair. In the end, the question this leaves for all of us is sobering. When faced with allegations as serious as these, who is truly being protected? The vulnerable or the powerful? This saga is a stark reminder that healing, whether for a family or a ministry, cannot come without truth. It cannot come without transparency. And it certainly cannot come by silencing the voices of those who cry out for justice. For Daystar, for the Lamb family, and for the countless viewers who once believed in the purity of their message, the only path forward is one marked by repentance, accountability, and the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful it may be. So as this story continues to unfold, through police updates, public statements, and the ripple effects across the Christian community, one thing is certain: this is no longer just about Daystar. It is about how the church at large handles abuse, power, money, and truth. It is about whether faith leaders can truly live by the same principles they preach to millions. And most of all, it is about whether we as believers will demand transparency and integrity from those who claim to represent Christ. And that leaves us with one final thought to wrestle with: if everything were laid bare before God's eyes, as Jonathan's dreamlike language has echoed before, would the actions of Daystar stand? That's the question viewers are left with, and it's a question that demands honest reflection, not polished public statements.